previous videos, I was working on my drawings and giving info on my artistic process for drawing, and it was a lot of fun to share with you. I experiment with and enjoy all sorts of mediums of art, and so, while I had the time over Christmas break, I thought I would share the process of making a BJD, or ball-jointed doll, from start to finish, using the methods that I have experimented with and found to enjoy. This doll is 3D printed from head to toe using a PLA extruder printer, specifically an HP Monoprice Inventor 2, which I love. Unfortunately, I don't have access to a resin 3D printer, which would be an ideal material for printing dolls like this. But I'm working with what I got, and I think this doll and the others I have made are fun and unique, despite having printing pass visible and not being as silky smooth and sturdy as a resin printed doll may be. Although I have designed files of my own to print using Tinkercad, I'm not so experienced yet as to sculpt my own doll digitally. To find this doll file and others like it, I just searched for BJD STL files and stumbled across this one on Thingiverse. I will link the doll in the description below if you'd like to check it out for yourself. I feel lucky to have gotten the files for this doll for free, as many BJD dolls are quite expensive for this level of workmanship. Be sure to read their info underneath the files on Thingiverse for more information on them and their creation. To get into the video, this is the first video in the series of making this particular doll, which is split up into 4 parts: preparing the body after printing, repainting the face, making the eyes, and making the wig. Most of what I have learned about doll making, I have learned from the many amazing doll artists here on YouTube, such as Delightful, Hexgen, Mozaikito, and many more. Their methods and videos are extremely well done, and the doll community here on YouTube has been wonderful to discover. In this series, I'll be showing and explaining the methods of how I use to create this doll, and while it may not be a full-on tutorial, there might just be some useful information. Without further ado, let's jump into preparing the body after all of the parts have been printed and are ready to go. To begin with, I'm making sure that I have 2 of every part that I need 2 of, and that every part I need has been printed. With a doll like this, it's easy to forget or misplace some of the many parts, and I like to have a diagram to check things off as I print them. All in all, this doll took about 50 or 60 hours to print and around 140 meters of filament roughly. The first thing I need to do is remove the supports that the pieces were printed on to help hold them up for each path. The rafts often leave behind tiny bits like you see here, but once I've taken off all the larger pieces, I go back with a pair of pliers to pluck off the smaller pieces. You can see that the supports left behind make their own strange sculpture in the end. Supports, I'm ready to sand the parts to remove excess material. I'm sure to set my Dremel to the lowest setting and wear eye protection, since bits tend to fly everywhere doing this. It's difficult to sand PLA completely smooth, as I have found, and it would take hours to get rid of the texture left behind from the printing paths. However, I do like to get rid of the rough spots where the supports were and anywhere that the printer messed up. I go back with sanding blocks after the Dremel tool, since the tool is so fast that it tends to melt the plastic if you sit in one spot for too long. The face is the one piece that I spend the most time sanding, just so that I have a smoother surface for the repaint later on, and this is the part of the doll that will be seen most often. The rest, I leave most of the printing texture alone. Unfortunately, I seem to have lost the footage of me dyeing the parts after cleaning them, but I simply use synthetic fabric dye and boil the parts in it for a few seconds each to tint them to a soft skin color instead of stark white. Now that all the parts are dyed and ready to be assembled, I need to make hooks around the feet and hands so that the elastic that will be strung through the doll has something to hold onto in order to keep tension. I use a fairly strong wire, bending a little to get it through the loop, then curling it the rest of the way around and using rounded jewelry pliers to make a hook that the elastic will go through. Once I've made the hook, I'm sure to check that it will fit into the cylindrical hole in the arm and calf piece so that the hands and feet are still able to move and rotate freely. You can see here that I had to make a small adjustment so that the hook would fit into the hole properly. Next is coating the inside of the joints with hot glue. This will make it so that the doll doesn't slip around as much when poses are attempted to be held. Only a very thin layer of hot glue is needed, and it's helpful to cut out small pieces of cardboard to smear the hot glue around to thin it out and make a nice even application. It only needs to be applied to the socket sides of the joints. Also, be careful not to plug the holes that the elastic will eventually pass through. Now that the joints are coated, it's finally time to assemble the doll, unless you prefer to paint the face first. I start with the arms so that the hole in the torso is easy to access. It helps to lay out the pieces to make sure that you have the right parts on the right sides, and it also helps to estimate the length of elastic that you'll need. It needs to be tight enough to hold a pose, but not so tight that the arms can't fully extend. It can be tricky to find the right balance, and I often have to try multiple times with plenty of patience. I use a ribbon to help feed the elastic through each piece and pull it through, hooking the hook on the hands on the end to keep it in place. It's important to note that the type of elastic that you use to string the doll also matters. I ended up having to get a thicker elastic since this kind ended up being too thin to hold a pose properly without being stretched to the limit and bending the hooks on the hands and feet. To string the legs and torso, you need a hook that will sit inside the divot inside the back of the head and hold the elastic in place there. There are special hooks made specifically for BJD dolls for doing this, but I just found a hook used for hanging things in my junk drawer that worked just fine since this will never be seen. Stringing the legs is essentially the same as stringing the arms, except that the elastic passes through the two leg holes. You can see here that I'm checking again to make sure that I have the right pieces on the right sides. Then I proceed just like the arms, using the ribbon to feed it through. Now the body is all put together. While the doll is a bit difficult to stand and pose, particularly in the legs and hips, she can stand on her own even without a doll stand if enough time is spent balancing her and getting the legs in the right direction. but this is little to complain about considering I have access to her files for free. I hope you'll join me for the next video, which I often find to be the most exciting, which is the repaint of the doll's face. I'll see you there.